in 2 Thessalonians 2 and verse 2, we had gotten down to. In these first two and the first part of verse 3, Paul is trying to quiet their fears and correct some false teachings that were there. And so he begins pleading with them about the second coming. That as we come down to verse 2, the reason that he is going to plead with them about the second coming is so that they would not be disturbed that this coming of Christ was immediately upon them. It was not at hand, as you remember John the Baptist and Jesus both saying that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Well, it's not at hand as they taught that. It was not immediately coming. Now, of course, we should always look for the second coming, but at this time, when Paul is writing this letter, it was not at hand. It could be at hand now. It could not be then, because there's some things that had to take place prior to that second coming. But some had been deceived that it was immediate, and thus they had quit their jobs. They were just waiting, doing nothing. The word soon, they be not soon shaken in mind, is from a Greek word that means suddenly, rashly, or easily. Probably carries more the idea of easily in this case. But it deals with the quickness of it taking place. It's used several times in Revelation about the Lord's coming. And some, in just a casual reading of it, think that he's going to come soon, based upon this word. It doesn't mean that, though. It deals with the manner in which he's going to come. In a quick manner, suddenly. Not the time element that it's going to be just, as we might put it, around the corner. But when he comes, it's going to be in a quick manner. The idea of shaken it means to agitate, to cause to totter like a reed, or the tossing or swelling of the sea. It literally is from your mind, which goes to one's reasoning power. God has, when he created man, given man power, the ability to reason, and reason correctly. And thus he could, in Isaiah's day, encourage him, "Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord." The Lord wanted to reason with him. Why? Because he had created man with that reasoning power. This is the idea of being away from that reasoning capability. Could we put it, they've lost their minds. I think some today, when they get into biblical study, have lost their minds. Paul is urging them to keep their minds clear-headed. So he says, "Be not soon shaken in mind, nor or be troubled." Word troubled means to be settled or to be thrown into confusion. It is a state of nervous excitement. Have you ever been expecting something and just you get so excited, the nervousness is just, well, that's what he's talking about. Don't get that way about the second coming by these false teachers who are saying that it's at hand. And we'll look at that in a minute, but they want to get you all nervous, that type of excitement where you can't think straight. You need to think straight, even about this. And a proper understanding of the Scriptures, and in particular, within the context here of the second coming, removes trouble and solidifies the mind, makes the mind firm. These brethren were not to be soon shaken or troubled by spirit, word, or an apparent letter by Paul. Apparently, I think obviously, there were those who were teaching error about the second coming. And they were trying to add credence to what they were saying and what they were teaching by associating Paul, or maybe another apostle, with what they were saying. Using Paul's name in relationship to it. I've never been well enough known or anything to have any concern about that. But there's some people, even in the brotherhood today, who have such a wide reputation and good reputation that if you want to associate something with it, you associate their names with it. And that somehow gives credence to the view. Of course, it should not, but at this time, with Paul, he being an inspired writer, if you associated a certain teaching with Paul, it immediately gave credence to it. It must be right. Paul's an apostle of Jesus Christ. God speaking to him. So if this came from Paul, obviously it's got to be right. That's basically what was going on. The word neither by spirit. Spirit here, I think, has reference to one who is claiming to speak by the direction of the Holy Spirit. In the King James, you'll notice that it is not capitalized. I think it probably should be, because I think it has reference to the Holy Spirit here. When they went to translate, you go back to the Greek, and there are no capital letters. So when you come to a word like spirit, the translators then have to make a determination. Do I believe that the context refers to, for example, man's spirit, or do I think it has reference to the Holy Spirit? If they thought that it had reference to the Holy Spirit, they would capitalize it. If they thought it had reference to man's own spirit, they would put it in lowercase. But it was all based upon the decision of the translators and how they viewed that word within the context. So when you come to spirit here, they apparently believed that it had reference to man's spirit or man's attitude. I think it has reference to the Holy Spirit, and thus I would have capitalized it. That here's someone claiming that they were speaking by the Holy Spirit in the direction of the Holy Spirit. That maybe the apostles had laid hands on me, and thus I am speaking by inspiration of God. I'm speaking by the Spirit. Now then, what was given in order to make sure that what they said was true? The what?
1 Corinthians 12:8-11, denying spiritual gifts, including speaking.
What confirmed the word? Miracles. So that's the way in which they at that time could affirm that this person was speaking by direction of the Holy Spirit. But here, they were living during that miraculous age, and thus individuals who are claiming to speak by that miraculous power, that the Spirit is directing them in what they say. Would that give credence to what they said? Would you have a tendency to believe someone who's claiming to speak by the direction of the Holy Spirit? Realizing at that time that those miracles did take place?
Not based on an assertion alone. You have to have some additional corroboration besides just
It still gives some credence to them. That the Holy Spirit has revealed this. Now then, they can make the claim, but they would need to perform the miracles, but it would tend to, and if there were especially people who from the first letter had taken some misunderstandings, then it just adds more credence to what they're saying. Word, neither by word, would probably have reference to an oral communication with Paul. Paul and I talked about this, basically, what they're saying. And so he told me such and such. It's amazing sometimes to find out what someone claims someone said as opposed to what they did say. A lot of times those are polar opposites. I've had it done to me. And just shake my head. But don't be soon shaken in mind or troubled by a word that this person supposedly had a conversation with me, Paul said. Third thing would be a letter as from us. This would be probably a forged letter, which had supposedly come from Paul. He didn't write it, but someone used his name in writing it. I'll just say that during the New Testament times, there were a lot of those letters that went around, where the author would try to associate his work and get it acceptance, broad acceptance, by invoking or using the name of an apostle. And so there's all these types of what some will come today and say, oh, there's all these lost books of the Bible. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, where the Apostle Thomas was supposedly wrote a gospel that's not been included in the Bible. We didn't know about it. Well, we did know about it, though. We found, and it was determined to be false. It was a lie, but it used Thomas's name in order to try to gain acceptance. There are books like that in the Old Testament as well. So this wasn't just a New Testament phenomena, it was also an Old Testament phenomena. They tried to get acceptance of their work by saying it was from a prophet or an apostle in the New Testament.
Are you trying to tell me that accusations without facts are worthless no matter who says it?
That would be pretty true. Accusations without facts. And that's not necessarily true in regards to this, as it wasn't accusations, it was false teaching without facts. Johnson in Johnson's notes mentioned Wednesday night that on that one set commentary, he was a member of the Lord's Church, by the way. Was a student of Alexander Campbell. But in his notes he said, "It is thought that a forged letter had been circulated to which Paul alludes. In the close of this epistle, he shows his letters may be known to be genuine. Some suppose, however, that by letter he refers to an incorrect interpretation which was placed upon the first letter." So, nor by letters as from us, there is that aspect. It might have been a forged letter, or it could have been 1 Thessalonians, and a misunderstanding of that book and what he wrote there. And that is a possibility in this, letter as from us. Well, I tend to think it's more of a forged letter myself, but the other is a possibility that I've heard, I guess, most of my life. As that, and as that the day of Christ is at hand, as that indicates the contents of this supposed message. As that, here's what this message is saying. What is it? That the day of Christ is at hand. At hand here can mean either something that is imminent or something that is present. I mean, I have New King James. I know many of you do. Some of you do, I know. New King James. Here's the American Standard. Or by word or by epistle as from us, as that the day of the Lord is at hand. That's the American Standard. New King James. As though the day of Christ had come. See a difference there? Huge difference, isn't it? That's the New King James. Most translations today, modern day translations, will be that type of an attitude, that it is presence, that it has come. The word can be taken either way. So, from the original Greek, it's kind of, I hate to use the word open, but that's what it is. It does not give you an indication one way or the other for certain. So it might be either one.
But then you also have to use context.
Then you have to use context, is really what determines it. And in this, the context could be either one. There's some that could have been teaching, it's already present. I mean, we've got some today that teach that. Or it could be that they were saying, you know, it's soon, it's going to happen immediately, it's imminent. So contextually, it can go either way as well.
That wouldn't rhyme with Acts 1:9-11's detail, would it? You know what I mean? Wow. That's pretty
We're not trying to debate it.
okay.
We're trying to recognize what is being stated at the time. And I will admit I have always taken it as being at hand and not as present. But the word itself can mean is present, and that certainly would fit the context even as at hand would. Thus, they should not be led or misled that the second coming was either present or was imminent. Either one. Today, we could say we should not be misled that it is present, as some have been. But we could say that it's possible that it is imminent, because that is a possibility. At that time, not so much, because there were some things that Paul's going to go through that had to take place prior to the second coming. So don't be disturbed in your mind by these false teachers. Don Walker pointed out that there was definitely false teaching circulating concerning the second coming of Christ. One, silent, invisible, past, and over with. Or two, perhaps some said it was underway, that is, going on at that time. Or three, perhaps some said it was about to occur. Paul refuted all these by saying that some things first had to happen. So, Brother Walker added that it's in the process of happening. It's underway. The things that we noticed in 1 Thessalonians, though, if it were underway, I think everybody would have known it. From what the description there is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. A.T. Robertson adds a good point that I wanted to emphasize, though, when he writes, and gets some before it, but it is enough to give one pause to note that Paul's indignation over this use of his name by one of the overzealous advocates of the view that Christ was coming at once. It is true that Paul was still alive, but if such pious fraud was so common and easily condoned as some today argue, it is difficult to explain Paul's evident anger. Moreover, Paul's words should make us hesitate to affirm that Paul definitely proclaimed the early return of Jesus. He hoped for it undoubtedly, but he did not specifically proclaim it as many today aver and accuse him of misleading the early Christians with a false presentation. It doesn't take very long in reading about Paul to come across this idea that A.T. Robertson is talking about, that Paul taught the immediate return of Christ, and that all of the New Testament time and all of the writers expected Jesus to return just right then. It was something that would just, as we put, right around the corner. And yet here we have those teaching that very doctrine, and Paul says, don't be soon shaken by them in your mind. This isn't right. And yet, people today affirm that that is exactly what Paul taught. No, it wasn't. And A.T. Robertson talks about Paul's anger at this. Maybe that's a little bit of a strong word, but in relationship to his response. But he definitely let them know this teaching is not right. Don't be disturbed by it. There's some things that are going to have to take place first. And so we come down to verse 3. And I'm going to divide this up some. The first part of the verse and the latter parts, but the entire verse says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. So again, the plea, let no man deceive you by any means, in any way, we would put it. Don't be deceived in any way by these false teachers, whether it's coming by letter, by word, or by false interpretation of what he had written. The word deceive, which Spiro states, to deceive completely, beguile, seduce, meaning to lead out of the right way into error. False doctrine concerning the second coming leads to being deceived, going out of the right way into error. Some individuals come along and they question, well, what difference does it make if someone believes that the resurrection has already occurred? And we have difficulty sometimes answering that. Some people would say, well, what difference does it make if someone believes premillennial doctrine? And many individuals have difficulty stating that as to what, why should it bother us? What difference does it make? That it makes a lot of difference. And it will lead us into error. that is the type of error that would cause one to be lost. So that's why maybe we can understand Paul later on in Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have delivered unto Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. In what regard? Teaching that the resurrection was past or already happened. By teaching that doctrine, it was blasphemy. You know, our 80-70 brethren in apostasy should remember that very thing. But it is of importance. Paul had just mentioned in the previous verse 3 ways in which some might have been deceived. Someone claiming to be speaking directly by the Holy Spirit, or by spoken word that they claim Paul spoke to them, or by a letter, either forged or misrepresenting a genuine letter of Paul. They were not to be deceived about the day of the Lord. Only after a falling away and the man of sin, who is the son of perdition, is revealed, will the Lord come. When it says for that day, it's italicized. That day is not in the original, but it certainly is within the context. Because what day is he talking about? He's talking about that day of Christ coming again, the second coming. Should we just briefly add, he does not say those days, as if this was a long drawn out over 7 years or 1,007 years time frame. The context obviously is showing that it is one day that is going to take place. The word falling away, except there come a falling away first. It comes from the Greek word apostasia. Now, does anyone recognize an English word that we use today from that Greek word? Apostasy or apostate. And we have those many in the denominational world telling us it is impossible to apostatize from the faith. If it's impossible to apostatize, why did Paul say there must be an apostasy first? It is the exact opposite of what these individuals who teach once saved, always saved are teaching. There has to be an apostasy first. And so while some deny it, Paul affirms it. Not only the possibility of it, but the absolute certainty of it. And that it would be a widespread apostasy, a widespread falling away. So you have those aspects in this. The absolute certainty of it, and that it will be widespread in its nature. It is an abandoning of a position that was once held. Can you fall away from something that you never did believe? No. Yeah. I've never jumped out of an airplane. Did I jump out of an airplane then? If I came along and said, I've jumped out of an airplane, but I've never jumped out of the airplane, is that possible? Might need to send me to, get the white coats out after me. And because we know it's, if you've never done it, and if it's not possible, then it can't happen. A falling away means that they had to have held to the truth at one time. Paul's statement in Galatians 5 and verse 4, you're fallen from grace. They had to have been in grace, in God's grace, in order to fall from it. You cannot fall from something that you never had. If they were never in grace, it's an impossibility to fall from it. But thus a position once held, it also has a meaning of rebellion, revolt, a defection that takes place from within the church. People fell away. But it ends up being active opposition against the church. Brethren who fall away are now in actual opposition to the church. They might not view it that way. Their hearts have grown cold and such, but in reality, they are actively opposing the church. They're actively opposing the Lord. Carl?
The Church of Thessalonians dominant.
It was comprised of both. As to predominant, I don't know which one it would be predominantly, but it was comprised of both Jew and Gentile. There's a lot of passages which in the New Testament that really set forth the possibility of apostasy. Acts 20 in verses 29 through 31, where Paul is speaking to the Ephesian elders. For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I cease not to warn everyone night and day with tears. In 1 Timothy 4, the first 3 verses says, now the Spirit speaketh expressly. That means the Spirit is speaking clearly on something. What is it? That in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meats which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth. Now then, the idea of departing from the faith shows that they must have been in the faith in order to depart from the faith. If they weren't in the faith, they couldn't depart from it. I could say that I've never been in Moscow. there's no way for me to have departed from Moscow. I've never been there. I have departed from, and I could list a lot of towns and cities, because I've been there, and I could depart from them. But a town I've never been in, impossible to depart from it. These departed from the faith. And they gave heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Well, that will really keep you in the faith, won't it? Saying sarcastically. Teaching the possibility that some individuals would leave the faith. There's numerous other passages that could be called upon that show the possibility of apostasy. I cannot understand anyone accepting that doctrine. It's just so absurd. Passage after passage. Why all the warnings in the Bible? Why all the exhortation in the Bible if it's an impossibility to fall? Those would be worthless. The entire book of Hebrews was written for the very fact that Jewish Christians were leaving the faith. They were apostatizing. Look at 5 of the 7 churches of Asia Minor in Revelation. They had left the faith or were leaving the faith. So just over and over and over, it's doctrine which becomes so obvious it's hard to understand anyone accepting it. But Paul uses here, when he says, except there come a falling away first, literally it is the falling away first. The definite article "the" is being used here in the original. And so Paul had a specific departure from the faith or from the truth in mind when he's writing this. No doubt, for example, when he's talking to the Ephesian elders that we just read about, that of their own selves men should arise speaking perverse things, so forth, and draw away disciples after them. There's going to be an apostasy because of that. Here, though, he's talking about, here's a specific falling away, the falling away. There's another apostasy, but he doesn't say that he is talking about there, but here he's referring to not just falling away from a general standpoint, it is the falling away. And it would be having the characteristics which Paul is going to set forth in this chapter. Carl.
When I read this, or when I was studying this, I always took this to be correct. It was talking about the prophecy of Christ coming to bring us the new government. And see, when you talk about all the Jews falling away from, they didn't want to believe it was him. And it was telling them that this is the Christ, this is the day of the Lord. And then he's bringing us salvation. I don't know why, but I took it because, like you said, it says it's at present. Well, we know the only way to be at present is that it's happening now.
But it wasn't happening, is what Paul's argument is. It is not taking place now. That is a false doctrine, he's saying. And so don't be deceived by it.
Yeah, but it was happening. Christ was here and he brought us the gospel. So to me, that was,
Well,
I didn't see him denying it, I guess. I don't know.
but he is in that passage. Don't be deceived, he says, by these things. So whatever it is that he's talking about, It's a false doctrine. It's error. And they are not to be deceived by it. We'll start in verse 3 then next time.